Joining us right now, once again, is CNN safety analyst David Susi and CNN transportation analyst Mary Schiavo. David, with the word from the police commissioner on the ground that they believe that there are no survivors, we heard from Zaka Jacob, the managing editor of the news there, saying that they've also heard that 30 people that were on the ground were rushed to hospitals in various states of grave injury. Knowing that this is, they're actively still looking for people, if not bodies, at the site, and an investigation needs to begin in earnest as to what happened. What needs to happen first?
Well, first needs to make sure that there's no people that are still alive within the debris. That's number one priority, is to make sure that there's any kind of rescue efforts that need to be done. Secondly, the bodies will be removed from the site. And then at the third point, that's when they'll start the investigation with the professionals there, which will include anyone from the engine manufacturer, the aircraft manufacturer, both nationalities and people usually from each of the nationalities that were represented in the victims on the flight as well. So it's quite a large effort, but at this point, they're just trying to make sure that if there are any survivors, that they are removed from the site.
Mary, we do have this video, a vantage point of the plane itself. Hopefully we can show it to you, where you can see the plane going down. There it is. I'm just going to let it play for a second. We know it's disturbing, but it is important to see. And then it ends in just a huge fireball. So Mary, as we see that video, before the crash, there's no smoke coming from the plane. I can't see any damage on the aircraft itself. What do you see there? What jumps out to you?
What jumps out to me is, first of all, for a takeoff sequence, the plane isn't configured properly. You have something called an angle of attack, and for takeoff, your nose is pointed several degrees above the horizon at the sky. And until the final second before the crash, this plane almost seems to have the nose at a level or just only a slightly up position. Then just before the crash, the nose does move up more, but the plane on takeoff should be pointed to the sky and it should be climbing. And in this case, it's not. It is sinking and the nose is not angled up. Now, we did have some other reports on an earlier commentator who mentioned a dual engine failure. It's too early to know that unless the pilot said that in the Mayday call. We don't know what was in the Mayday call, but in a Mayday call, the rules, if you will, for a Mayday call is that you believe you are in imminent danger of losing the plane. So the pilot knew that something was very seriously wrong with the plane. And also in that video, we can see that the landing gear is down. And it looks to me, now it's hard for me to get real clarity, but it looks to me like the flaps, part of the wing that help with lift, are up. And usually it's the other way around. Usually you stow the landing gear, put the landing gear up at takeoff, and then stow the flap. So there's much to learn what's going on here, but that video does give some important clues.
And David, the fact that there was this Mayday call made, the fact that the signal, as it was reported from the plane, was lost just 625 feet above ground, is there a place where this leads investigators to investigate first?
Well, the first place to start is when the aircraft started rolling. So the question is the decision point, which is V1. At V1, they're deciding they're too far down the runway to abort the takeoff, or they're going to abort the takeoff. That's what V1 is. And on this aircraft, that's about 165 knots. So that's the decision point. At that point, you continue about another 10 knots to 175. And then at that point is VR, where you can rotate and bring the aircraft off the ground. So whatever happened, in my mind, it happened after V1. They achieved the 165 knots, they started to roll, and then they decided at that point, it's too late to stop, hit the brakes and make this stop. So we're gonna go ahead and get off the ground. And as Mary said, you don't see the nose coming up, which indicates to me that they didn't get enough speed at VR. They didn't actually get enough speed to get off the ground and maintain a climb. So that's where I would look first, is to see where the decision was made and what caused that aircraft to not have enough power to get through the rotation.
Mary, I didn't want to quickly ask you about the black box, being that this had just happened, just taken off less than a minute. The plane obviously exploding, lots of fuel on board, hitting buildings as well. I mean, what shape is the black box in at this point when you look at what happened there?
Well, I'll tell you what shape the black box is supposed to be in, and that is it is supposed to survive. It is built, it is intended, the way it is housed and protected. It is supposed to survive, terrible infernos. Now, I worked on the 9/11, September 11, 2001 plane crashes, and for example, the black boxes in the World Trade Center did not survive, nor did the Pentagon. The flames were just too hot, but those were much older black boxes. This is the newest of the new. There will be thousands of data points on there, and it is supposed to survive. And if I had to predict, I think they will find it and that it will survive because that's what it's intended to do.
I want to go to now CNN correspondent Nada Bashir, who is live at London's Gatwick Airport, which is, of course, where the plane was scheduled to land later today. And Nada, there has been a reception area set up there for families.
That's right. This is a huge moment of anguish, of course, for family members and relatives waiting for more information from officials surrounding the fate of their loved ones who were on board that flight. As we understand it, among the 242 passengers and crew members who were on board, at least 53 are confirmed to have been British nationals. So there is a huge focus, of course, here for the government and authorities in the United Kingdom on coordinating with officials in India as the investigation into this crash now continues and unfolds. And as you mentioned, a reception centre has been set up here, as well as a hotline for relatives and family members waiting to get those updates. Gatwick has said that they will also be providing support, of course, for those bereaved family members who may come here to Gatwick Airport just outside of London to wait for that updated information coming from officials. Of course, the government is also keeping a close eye on this. We've heard from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who has said and described the scene in India as devastating, but he's also said that he is being kept abreast of the ongoing investigation and any updates that may be coming from officials in India. And of course, we've also heard from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. He spoke just a short while ago in the House of Commons addressing lawmakers there. He has confirmed that the British government has stood up crisis teams both in Delhi and London to coordinate with officials in India with regards to both the investigation and providing emergency support for family members and relatives. And of course, we've also heard from the royal family as well. Important to note that there are huge and long-standing historical and cultural ties, of course, between the United Kingdom and India. There is a huge Indian community here in the United Kingdom. So this is a deeply personal crisis for many. And we've heard from King Charles saying, "My wife and I have been desperately shocked by the terrible events in Ahmedabad this morning." He said that the royal family's special prayers and deepest possible sympathies are with the families and friends of those affected. And he also paid tribute to the emergency services who have responded to this fatal plane crash. But again, we are still waiting for more information with regards to how this will impact family members and loved ones. We haven't yet seen the typical sort of gathering here at Gatwick Airport of family members and relatives. But of course, this is a very sensitive and delicate time for those relatives and loved ones. So of course, officials are taking extra precautions to ensure that this is also a moment of privacy for those impacted as well.
We are joined now by CNN aviation analyst Miles O'Brien. Miles, as we look at that, there have been some questions about the plane itself, about, frankly, the level of the plane and what that looked like. Contact was lost, according to Flight Tracker, at 625 feet. What do you make of not only the information we have, but how that fits with what we're seeing in that video?
Well, Erica, if you look toward the beginning of that video, maybe we can get a freeze or slow it down a little bit. What really strikes a pilot as you look at that is there's no indication or evidence that the flaps were deployed at that time. The flaps are the movable aerodynamic structures at the trailing edge of the wing, and the slats are similar structures at the leading edge of the wing. They increase the lift of the wing crucially during takeoff when speeds are lower. In addition to that, okay, so it's hard to see there, but there's no indication that the flaps are deployed there. And interestingly, the landing gear is still down. So you have a scenario on a hot day, a fully loaded aircraft for a 9-hour flight to London Gatwick. And on a hot day, you have less lift in the air because the air molecules are less dense. You have evidently the flaps not deployed and the landing gear down, which increases the drag. So there were evidently a lot of problems which made it difficult for this aircraft to take flight and hold altitude, quite obviously. Now, why would this happen? The 787 has been in service now for about a decade or so. It's never had a crash that involved fatalities, and it is a highly automated aircraft that involves all kinds of checks and counter checks and redundancies to make sure it's in the proper configuration before takeoff. So very early to say why this is in this evident position of no flaps, but that would certainly explain why the aircraft could not maintain hold altitude or, for that matter, climb.
When you mentioned, as you point out there, the landing gear that's still down, I mean, how quickly is the landing gear typically up after takeoff?
The normal sequence would be once you have a positive rate of ascent, the pilot flying will call gear up. The pilot monitoring will put the landing gear up. The flaps remain down. And as speed gradually increases, more lift over the wings, they slowly stow those flaps. And eventually, as it gets to a cruise flight, you sort of what they call clean up the wing, stow the flaps and slats so that the aircraft can fly at cruise speed. That's the normal sequence of events. What seems odd here is that the flaps were stowed and the gear was still down. Why did that happen? That's what pilots are looking at right now.
And so also, walking us through, so the fact that all of this happened in under a minute, this Mayday call is sent out to air traffic control, and then from what we've been told, there is no further communication. We all hear about a Mayday call. We've seen TV, we've seen the movies, but in reality, what does that mean when a pilot says this is a Mayday call as opposed to calling into air traffic control with some other sort of issue? I have an issue with the landing gear, for example. What does that change in terms of the sequence of events when it's an actual Mayday call?
Well, when you declare an emergency, which is a Mayday, instantly all airspace around you is yours. You can do whatever you want. It is incumbent upon air traffic control to clear air traffic out of the area, to do whatever maneuvers might be necessary to save the aircraft and the souls on board. So Mayday is a very simple way to obtain complete priority over the skies and let air traffic control know there's a problem. Was there time for them to, explain the details? Clearly not. But Mayday summed up that they were dealing with a problem that seemed to be beyond them at that time.
Yeah. We've seen these images as well of the tail section, a portion of the tail section of the plane in this building in the area where the plane crashed. We're told that the building itself is what's being referred to as a doctor's hostel, a mess, if you will, where a number of medical students were likely having lunch at the time, because this was 1:39 local time that the plane went down. The fact that that portion of the plane, though, does appear to be accessible, and that is where we would find the black boxes, that could offer some answers more quickly, perhaps, than in a number of situations.
Yeah, the 787 is a highly advanced aircraft. There are multiple streams of data feeding into the flight data recorder or black box. Presumably, the cockpit voice recorder also captured conversations among the crew during this very short flight. So that is a good sign that there will be some real evidence for investigators to look at as they try to determine what happened. Once, really crucially here will be conversations between the crew as they configure that aircraft for departure. The system is designed to cross-check the actual configuration of the plane with what the crew has commanded based on the weather and the amount of fuel and everything else. And if there's a discrepancy, there should be oral warnings and other indications to the crew that the plane is not configured the way it was supposed to be. So there's all kinds of ways this aircraft is designed to tell a crew that this airplane is not ready for takeoff. So it'll be very interesting to listen to that cockpit voice recorder as well as look at the data to see what went on.
Yeah, absolutely. Miles, appreciate your expertise as always. I know we'll continue to check in with you.
CNN's Tom Foreman has been digging into as much information as we can find out. What are you learning, Tom?
Well, this is it's a mystery at the moment, obviously. Let's take a look at where this plane was going to fly to. If you look at that map, it's a pretty long flight. These people would have, I mean, obviously, you're just getting off the ground. They haven't really even started yet. The crash happened right next to the airport. This is a picture of the type of aircraft, 787-8. This is a Boeing aircraft. This one was almost, I believe, a dozen years old. But it had a lot of excellent flying time. 2023 was delivered to Air India. It was made in Seattle. It had 18 business seats, 238 economy seats, and so on. And if you look at this map, this is very important here. That's the airport over there to the right. And that medical college down there is where it crashed. So you can see that if you just doubled the runway, you get to the distance involved here, which speaks to what some of our aviation analysts said earlier on. This plane does not appear to have ever really initiated a takeoff in terms of a successful takeoff. That transitional time from being on the ground to being in the air. If you talk about being at 625, 650 feet, where it seems to be the highest point they reach, bear in mind that is so low that could not even fly across the island of Manhattan because there are buildings that are much taller than that. Freedom Tower, like 3 times as tall as that, roughly, something like that. So this never really got off the ground here. 2 engines on this plane. We know that there was a Mayday called out for this moment. The question is, if theoretically this plane should be able to take off on 1 engine, but it did not successfully take off. It would have been at somewhere approaching 200 miles an hour when it took off. That's one of the reasons why when a crash like this happens, people can't survive, because the impact of stopping at that speed is so much that even if they didn't have the fireball, tremendous impact. One thing I want to mention, John, this airport has been working in recent years, from all the accounts I can find, they have been working on a higher than usual bird strike problem there, with flocks of vultures and a type of raptor called a black kite. It's the most common in the world. It's about a 1.5 pound bird, so a type of a hawk or falcon type of bird, if you want to think of it that way. They've had a problem with this in the past, and they've been trying to reduce the number of bird strikes. That would be another thing that you would look at, because that is the kind of thing we know from the Miracle on the Hudson that can take a plane out really fast, can take out the engines very fast. Do we know that in this case? No, we don't, but we know it's one of the things they have to consider, especially at this airport where they've dealt with this. John?
Yeah, that is an interesting data point that I had not heard. Tom Foreman, thank you very much.
Scott Hamilton is an aviation analyst. He's joining us now from Paris. So, Scott, as we're bringing our viewers up to speed on what we do know in this moment, this is a residential area, a fairly large residential area just outside of the airport in Ahmedabad. And what we know is that this flight it lost contact less than a minute after takeoff, registered a Mayday call. There is not much else that we know in this moment. As you're seeing these images, though, come in from the ground, and even the video that we have that was taken by a bystander noticing this plane on takeoff just moments before that crash, what stands out to you, and what are your main questions?
Well, we don't know much of anything, as you pointed out. The only thing we know is there was a Mayday call and the plane didn't get very high. Looking at that video, though, and mind you, this is a amateur video. The thing that stood out to me is it did not look like the flaps were extended. Now, the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, will be able to verify that or not, but in the video it did not look like the flaps were extended, and if the flaps weren't extended, then the slats probably weren't extended on the leading edge, and many a plane has crashed because the flaps and slats were not extended. Now, I really want to caution, that's just what I could see on this amateur video. on a very small screen. I'm traveling, I'm on my laptop computer. So I just want to really be cautious about that.
Sure. And that is understandable for people who aren't familiar with the workings of a plane. Just put into context for us what it means when those flaps do not extend. What does that mean for the plane itself and how it can or cannot operate?
Now let's remember that the pilots set the flaps and the slats. It's not the airplane that does that. And if the flaps and slats are not set properly on takeoff, the wings don't generate the lift that's necessary. And what you can see in this video is that the plane is kind of flat and starts to descend. So my first impression is that this may be a flap and slat issue that you don't get lift on. Now, again, we won't know that until we get the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder and perhaps better camera videos from other angles, because this was an angle from the rear of the airplane, and it's just pretty difficult to really get a firm grip on if those flaps and slats were extended or not.
Yeah, and I'm going to see if the control room, I don't know if we could put up that video specifically that Scott is referring to that we have from someone on the ground. As Mary Schiavo pointed out, important to note, we don't know the exact angle that it was taken off. And I do want to give you a warning that this may be difficult for some people, this video showing just moments before the plane crashes, and we can see what appears to be some of that crash afterwards. As we work to get that video up, we also, of course, had just shown our viewers what appears to be the tail of the plane in a building in this residential area. As we're talking about that video there, you can see it, these very important flight data recorders, the cockpit voice recorder. It's my understanding that oftentimes those are located in the tail of the plane. So potentially this could be helpful in terms of that investigation and access to those black boxes in a more timely manner, frankly.
That's right. The black boxes are in the tail of the airplane precisely because the tail is usually the part of the airplane that survives a crash like this. The investigators are going to certainly take a look at the pilot history, the maintenance of the airplane, whether there might have been any foreign object debris on the runway, whether there might have been a bird strike. And once they have a chance to look at the videos and enhance this video that we've seen or see other videos, they may well zero in on this flaps and slats issue. That appears to me like the flaps were up. I couldn't see the slats.
Mm-hmm. There was also the fact that this Mayday call came less than a minute after takeoff. The flight, last contact was at 625 feet, but it was dropping. It was falling at a rate of 470 feet per minute. We're talking, of course, about a matter of seconds after takeoff. But given how low it was to the ground, comparatively speaking, how quickly it was dropping, what are your concerns, not just about the plane itself, but also the impact, frankly, on the larger area, given that this is a residential area not too far from the airport and fairly dense?
Yeah, the investigators are also going to be looking to see what kind of power the engines were producing at the time. If there were bird strikes, that could have interrupted power, but I didn't see any compressor stalls, which is typical with a bird strike in this video, but they'll look into that as well. As far as crashing into a populated area, that's just bad luck of the draw here.
Yeah, and it is, as far as we know, no weather issues, we've been told, at the time in the area, as, of course, investigators are starting to look into anything, obviously, that could come into play here in terms of this investigation. We do have this video that both you and I were referencing earlier. I just want to let our visitors know we're only going to show this once because we understand that it could be disturbing. But as we put it up, Scott, just to go through again what you can or cannot see in terms of the angle of that plane and what investigators may be looking at based, here we go, on this video. So we see this plane. You can see someone captured the plane, obviously, and then as it goes out of frame, we do see a moment later, of course, which is difficult, this plume of fire and smoke. It appeared fairly straight as it's going across the screen there. What can you glean from that, if anything?
Yeah, well, it certainly was not in the climbing attitude. it wasn't in a nose-up climb like anybody who's ever been on an airplane or watched an airplane take off, they see it in a nose-up attitude when they climb. This was in a flat or reasonably flat attitude away from the runway. And it just didn't seem to be climbing at all. Now, again, is it because the wings weren't generating lift because of the flaps and slats? Was the airplane going too slow because of a bird strike? Was it going too slow because of an engine problem? Again, as you pointed out, the investigators are going to be looking at a dozen or more areas of routine investigation. They'll look into the pilot history, the maintenance history, and so on and so on.
And when we talk about this plane specifically, a 787 Dreamliner, they were first introduced in 2011, just recently marking 1 billion passengers, right? Boeing marking that recently. These are planes that likely many people who fly have been on. It is used a great deal. Some 2,100 flights a day involve a 787 Dreamliner. Talk to us about the safety history of this aircraft.
Well, this is the first accident with the 787. And in fact, I just flew into Paris for the Paris Air Show that begins next week on a 787 from United Airlines out of Chicago. So it's a safe airplane. It had a troubled history in its production period before it entered service in 2011, but that is ancient history now. And this airplane was 11 years old, according to the information that I've seen on the internet so far. It's one that's been maintained by Air India, and of course the level of maintenance is going to be part of the investigation. That's routine, but it is a safe airplane, and this is the very first fatal accident of 787.
And in terms of how broadly it's used, just for people who are watching today, as we noted, of course, flight suspended at this moment in and out of Ahmedabad. Is this something that, pardon me, people should be concerned about? I mean, when you talk about that safety history, when we're looking at planes, this feels like a very safe plane as you're looking at it. And as we know, air travel actually is one of the safest forms of transportation.
Yeah, there are, I think, more than 1,000 787s in service, and I think something like 23 or 2,400 have been ordered all over the course of its lifetime so far. All the kinks have been worked out of the airplane, and I know that because it's a Boeing airplane, and the 787 did have some early history that I mentioned, people are going to jump to conclusions that this is another Boeing problem, and I would certainly caution people against doing that, because I think probably this is going to be an operational problem, not an airplane problem per se, because the airplane, again, this is the first accident since it went into service in 2011. It's got a very good safety record.